In West Africa, ladies and gentlemen, a quiet shift began to take shape. It did not actually start with loud speeches or global applause. It started with firm decisions taken inside a landlocked country or state facing deep security and economic pressure. Burkina Faso had actually struggled for years with debt, food shortages, and weak industry and foreign influence. Many citizens had actually lost trust in the future. Daily life felt heavy. The state relied on outside lenders. Yes, raw materials actually left the country with little benefits returning home. Farmers worked hard but earned little. Ladies and gentlemen, rules actually aged. Youth actually searched for hope. Then a new leadership path actually emerged or appeared. It did not actually promise comfort. It did not actually seek approval from the powerful global institutions. It focused on control, production, and of course local value, step by step, policy by policy, and of course the direction began to change. The place surprised observers. Ladies and gentlemen, the tone remained firm but restrained. The actions stayed focused on structure rather than noise. Now let's discuss the main story here, ladies and gentlemen. In September 2022, Captain Ibrahim Traoré became the president of Burkina Faso. He was one of the youngest leaders in the world, ladies and gentlemen. His rise became during a time of conflict and pressure. Armed groups controlled part of the state or the country. State revenue was actually weak. Yes, very weak and feeble. Public trust was actually low. His government faced limited time and of course high expectations. Now let's talk about the 20 different things that this guy has actually done so far within 2 years. Now, one, economic growth became the one early measure of change. Yes, so Burkina Faso's gross domestic product rose from about 18.8 billion US dollars to around 22.1 billion US dollars within 2 years. Ladies and gentlemen, this increase reflected higher domestic activity, stronger agricultural output, and local processing efforts. Growth did not actually remove all hardship, but it showed movement, ladies and gentlemen. Number two, the government rejected new loans from the IMF and of course the World Bank. Yes, this is official. Now, President Traoré stated that Africa did not actually need dependency on global leaders from Europe or North America. These decisions aimed to reduce long-term debt pressure and policy influence from outside institutions. It shifted focus toward internal resources and of course regional partners, ladies and gentlemen. Number three, political leadership was actually reduced whilst public workers' pay increased. Yes, so ministers and of course parliament members saw a 30% salary cut. Yes, so civil servants received a 50% pay rise, ladies and gentlemen. So this move aimed to actually ease daily pressure on workers and of course signal shared sacrifice at the top, ladies and gentlemen. Number four, domestic debt was actually fully cleared. Yes, so the government paid off money owed to local suppliers and of course institutions. This step restored confidence inside the country and helped businesses operate again without fear of delayed payment. These early steps, ladies and gentlemen, set the tone. They actually showed a focus on discipline, control, and of course, internal strength. The government actually moved from the financial signals to production choices. Food security became central. Burkina Faso depends heavily on farming. Many crops were actually exported raw. Value was actually lost outside the country. Number five, 2 tomato processing plants were launched for the first time. Yes, so instead of selling tomatoes only as a raw product, ladies and gentlemen, the country or state began processing them locally. Yes, locally. So this created jobs and reduced imports of tomato paste. Number six, ladies and gentlemen, a modern gold mine opened in 2023. Gold is Burkina Faso's top export. The new mine focused on improved refinery capacity. It aimed to increase value kept inside the country. Number seven, the export of unprocessed gold to Europe was actually ended. Raw gold shipment, ladies and gentlemen, stopped. Yes, so the policy pushed for local refinements before export. This change targeted, the long-term industrial growth rather than the short-term cash, ladies and gentlemen. So industrial expanded beyond mining. Yes, industrial expanded beyond mining. So now this happened to be number eight. So a second cotton processing facility was also built or constructed. So before this, ladies and gentlemen, Burkina Faso had only one cotton. Cotton is a major crop. Processing it locally adds value and of course support farmers. Number nine, a national support center for artisanal cotton processing was also created. So small scale producers gained technical and institutional support. So this actually helped rural communities earn more from their labor. Ladies and gentlemen, now economic policy blended with cultural identity. Number 10, colonial era court dress was actually removed. Colonial era court dress was actually removed. So British style wigs and of course gowns were actually banned in court. Judges now wear traditional Burkinabense clothing. This step was aimed to affirm national identity and legal independence. By the end of the second year, ladies and gentlemen, now the government had actually laid foundations, economic control, local production, and of course, symbolic reform worked together. So the story then moved deeper into agriculture and sovereignty or independence. Now let's talk about land, food, and self-reliance. Agriculture actually supports most families in Burkina Faso, ladies and gentlemen. For years, farmers actually faced weak tools, low yields, and of course limited support. So the Traore administration placed farming as the center of the national stability. Number 11, large-scale agricultural equipment was distributed. Yes, so more than 400 tractors, 239 tilters, 710 motor pumps, and 740 motorcycles were actually given to farmers and rural groups. So this equipment improved speed, reach, and of course efficiency. Number 12, improved seeds and essential inputs were supplied. Farmers received better seed varieties and of course fertilizers. So these inputs raised output and of course reduced crop loss, ladies and gentlemen. So results followed. These are the results followed. Number 11, tomato production increased. Yes, tomato production actually was increased. Output rose from 315,000 metric tons in 2022 to 360,000 metric tons in 2024. So processing plants helped absorb supply. So number 4, the millet production grew. Yes, so harvest increased from 907,000 metric tons to 1.1 million metric tons. Millet is a key food crop for local diet. 15, rice production expanded. Rice output rose from 280,000 metric tons to 326,000 metric tons. This actually reduced reliance on imports, ladies and gentlemen. So these gains strengthened food security. They also reduce inflation pressure. Farmers earned more stable income, ladies and gentlemen. Rural areas also gained renewed activity. So at the same time, guess what, ladies and gentlemen, sovereignty became a core theme. Number 16, French military operations were banned. Yes, this one is official, more than even official. So foreign troops no longer operated freely on Burkina Faso's soil. So the government actually emphasized national command over security. Number 17, French media outlets were prohibited or banned from operating. Yes, so authorities stated concerns about bias and of course influence. Local media space expanded as a result. Number 18, so French troops were expelled. Yes, so military agreement were actually ended. Burkina Faso redefined its defense partnerships. These decisions, ladies and gentlemen, actually marked a strong break from the former colonial ties. They also brought diplomatic tension. The government framed them as steps toward control and of course dignity. So development actually continued alongside security shift. Number 19, ladies and gentlemen, road construction and upgrades expanded nationwide. Yes, so old roads were actually widened, ladies and gentlemen. Grave routes were also paved. Transport links improved the trade and of course mobility. Burkina Faso actually showed clear movement toward self-reliance. Farming fed industry, sovereignty guided policy, infrastructure supported growth. Now let's talk about the structure, risk, and of course public trust. Reform, ladies and gentlemen, always carries risk. Rapid change test institutions and public patience. So the Traore government actually faced this challenge openly, ladies and gentlemen. So economic independence reduced access to easy loans. So the states had to rely on discipline and of course planning. So clearing domestic debt helped, but external pressure remained. Agricultural success required coordination. Equipment had no reach, the right hands. Seeds needed fair distribution. Local officials carried heavy responsibility or duty. So industrial policy faced the market limit. Processing plant needed steady supply and energy. Gold refinery required skill and of course regulation. So still, the strategy followed one logic. Value will actually stay inside the country or state. Labor should actually benefit local people. Ladies and gentlemen, identity should actually reflect national history. Public response remained mixed but engaged. Salary cuts for leaders signaled restraints. Pay rises for workers, eased tension. Cultural changes and caused the strengthening pride. Security challenges actually continues. Ending foreign military presence placed more burdens on national forces. Sorry. So this demanded training, unity, and of course patience. Please, if you actually find this particular analysis very useful, please make sure to take a moment to like this video in the first place. Secondly, subscribe to this particular community so that you can actually be updated always. The government maintained a calm tone despite criticism. It framed reforms as long-term choices rather than quick fixes. Communication and focus on results rather than promises. Development requires movements, roads, airports, and of course logistics shape opportunity. So number 20, construction began on the Ouagadougou, Donzin airports. So the new airport was actually planned to open in 2025. It will actually handle 1 million passengers each year, ladies and gentlemen. So this project actually aims to support trade, tourism, and of course regional assets. So road projects actually continued alongside the airport. These investments linked farms to actually markets. So they actually reduced travel time. They lowered the transport cost. So together, ladies and gentlemen, these changes actually formed a pattern, economic control, and of course local processing. So agriculture was strength, culture was confidence, infrastructure was growth. The Traore era remains ongoing. Challenges actually remain real. Security threats persist. Founding limit test progress, ladies and gentlemen. International pressure continues. So yet the direction is clear or unequivocal. Burkina Faso has actually chosen internal strength over dependency, production over exports of raw goods. Okay, so identity over inherited symbols. So ladies and gentlemen, this story does not actually end here. It continues with every harvest, every road was laid, and every policy tested. Okay, so thank you so much for watching this video. Don't forget to actually join us for more powerful updates like this.